King began to rule in Judah, Babylon's king Nebuchadnezzar attacked Jerusalem with his armies, and the Lord gave him victory over Jehoiakim. When he returned to Babylon, he took some of the sacred cups from the temple of God, and placed them in the treasury of his God in the land of Shinar. Then he ordered Ashpenaz, who was in charge of his palace personnel, to select some of the Jewish youth brought back captives, young men of the royal family and nobility of Judah, and to teach them the Chaldean language and literature. Pick strong, healthy, good-looking lads, he said. Those who have read widely in many fields, are well-informed, alert, and sensible, and have enough poise to look good around the palace. The king assigned them the best of food and wine from his own kitchen during their 3-year training period, planning to make them his counselors when they graduated. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were 4 of the young men chosen, all from the tribe of Judah. However, their superintendent gave them Babylonian names as follows. Daniel was Belteshazzar, Hananiah called Shadrach, Mishael was called Meshach, Azariah was called Abednego. But Daniel made up in his mind not to eat the food and wine given to them by the king. He asked the superintendent for permission to eat other things instead. Now, as it happened, God had given the superintendent a special appreciation for Daniel and sympathy for his predicament. But he was alarmed by Daniel's suggestion. I'm afraid you will become pale and thin compared with the other young youths your age, he said, and then the king will behead me for neglecting my responsibilities. Daniel talked it over with the steward who was appointed by the superintendent to look after Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and then suggested a 10-day diet of only vegetables and water. Then at the end of this trial period, the steward could see how they looked in comparison with the other fellows who ate the king's rich food and decide whether or not to let them continue their diet. That's a long sentence. The steward finally agreed to the test. Well, at the end of the 10 days, Daniel and his 3 friends looked healthier and better nourished than the youths who had been eating the food supplied by the king. So afterward, the steward fed them only vegetables and water without the rich foods and wines. God gave these 4 youths great ability to learn, and they soon mastered all the literature and science of the time. And God gave to Daniel special ability in understanding the meanings of dreams and visions. When a 3-year training period was completed, the superintendent brought all the young men to the king for oral exams, as had been ordered to do so. King Nebuchadnezzar had long talks with each of them, and none of them impressed him as much as Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they were put on his regular staff of advisors, and in all matters requiring information and balanced judgment, the king found these young men's advice 10 times better than that of all the skilled magicians and wise astrologers in his realm. Daniel held his appointment as the king's counselor until the 1st year of the reign of King Cyrus. Daniel chapter 2. One night in the 2nd year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had a terrifying nightmare and awoke trembling with fear. And to make matters worse, he couldn't remember his dream. He immediately called all his magicians, incantationists, sorcerers, and astrologers and demanded that they tell him what his dream had been. I've had a terrible nightmare, he said as they stood before him, and I can't remember what it was. Tell me, for I fear some tragedy awaits me. Then the astrologer, speaking in Aramaic, said to the king, Sir, tell us the dream and we can tell you what it means. But the king replied, I tell you the dream is gone. I can't remember it. And if you won't tell me what it is and what it means, I'll have you torn limb from limb and your horses made into heaps of rubble. But I will give you many wonderful gifts and honors if you tell me what the dream was and what it means. So begin. And they said, how can we tell you what the dream means unless you tell us what it was? The king retorted, I can see your trick. You're trying to stall for time until a calamity befalls me that the dream foretells. But if you don't tell me the dream, you certainly can't expect me to believe your interpretation. The astrologers replied to the king, there isn't a man alive who can tell others what they have dreamed, and there isn't a king in all the world who would ask such a thing. This is an impossible thing that the king requires. No one except the gods can tell you your dream, and they are not here to help. Upon hearing this, the king was furious and sent out orders to execute all the wise men of Babylon. And Daniel and his companions were rounded up with the others to be killed. But when Arioch, the chief executioner, came to kill them, Daniel handled the situation with great wisdom by asking, why is the king so angry? What is the matter? Then Arioch told him all that had happened. So Daniel went to see the king. Give me a little time, he said, and I will tell you the dreams and what it means. Then he went home and told Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions. They asked the God of heaven to show them his mercy by telling them the secret so that they would not die with the others. And that night in a vision, God told Daniel what the king had dreamed. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven, saying, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for he alone has all wisdom and all power. World events are under his control. He removes kings and sets up others on their thrones. He gives wise men their wisdom and scholars their intelligence. He reveals profound mysteries beyond man's understanding. He knows all hidden things, for he is light, and darkness is no obstacle to him. I thank and praise you, O God of my fathers, for you've given me wisdom and glowing health, and even now, this vision of the king's dream and the understanding of what it means. Then Daniel went in to see Arioch, who had been ordered to execute the wise men of Babylon, and said, "Don't kill them. Take me to the king, and I will tell him what he wants to know." Then Arioch hurried Daniel into the king and said, "I found one of the Jewish captives who will tell you your dream." The king said to Daniel, "Is this true? Can you tell me what my dream was and what it means?" Daniel replied, "No wise man, astrologer, magician, or wizard can tell the king such things. But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has told you in your dream what will happen in the future. This was your dream. You dreamed of coming events. He who reveals secrets was speaking to you. But remember, it's not because I'm wiser than any living person that I know this secret of your dream. God showed it to me for your benefit. O king, you saw a huge, powerful statue of a man shining brilliantly, frightening and terrible. The head of the statue was made of purest gold. Its chest and arms were of silver, its belly and thighs of brass, its legs of iron, its feet part iron and part clay. But as you watched, a rock was cut from the mountainside by supernatural means. It came hurling toward the statue and crushed the feet of iron and clay, smashing them to bits. Then the whole statue collapsed into a heap of iron, clay, brass, silver, and gold. Its pieces were crushed as small as chaff, and the wind blew them all away. But the rock that knocked the statue down became a great mountain that covered the whole earth. That was the dream, and now for its meaning. Your Majesty, you are a king over many kings, for the God of heaven has given you your kingdom, power, strength, and glory. You rule the farthest provinces, and even animals and birds are under your control, as God decreed. You are that head of gold. But after your kingdom has come to an end, another world power will arise to take your place. The empire will be inferior to yours, and after that the kingdom has fallen. Yet a third great power, represented by the bronze belly of the statue, will rise to rule the world. Following it, the fourth kingdom will be as strong as iron, smashing, bruising, and conquering. The feet and toes you saw, part iron and part clay, show that later on this kingdom will be divided. Some parts of it will be as strong as iron and some as weak as clay. The mixture of iron with clay also shows that these kingdoms will try to strengthen themselves by forming alliances with each other through intermarriage of their rulers. But this will not succeed, for iron and clay don't mix. My God. During the reigns of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. No one will ever conquer it. It will shatter all these kingdoms into nothingness, but it shall stand forever, indestructible. That is the meaning of the rock cut from the mountain. Glory. Without human hands, that rock crushed to powder all the iron and clay, the silver and the gold. Thus the great God has shown what will happen in the future, and this is the interpretation of your dream, as is sure and certain as my description of it. Then Nebuchadnezzar fell to the ground before Daniel and worshipped him and commanded his people to offer sacrifices and burnt sweet incense before him. Truly, O Daniel, the king said, your God is the God of gods, ruler of kings, revealer of mysteries, because he has told you this secret. Then the king made Daniel very great. He gave him valuable gifts and appointed him to be ruler over the whole province of Babylon, as well as chief over all his wise men. Then at Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego as Daniel's assistants to be in charge of all the affairs of the province of Babylon. Daniel served as chief magistrate in the king's court. Daniel chapter 3. King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue 90 feet high and 9 feet wide and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then he sent messages to all the princes, governors, captains, judges, treasurers, counselors, sheriffs, and rulers of all the provinces of his empire to come to the dedication of the statue. When they'd all arrived and were standing before the monument, a herald shouted out, O people of all nations and languages, this is the king's command. When the band strikes up, you are to fall flat to the ground to worship King Nebuchadnezzar's gold statue. Anyone who refuses to obey will immediately be thrown into a flaming furnace. This is a madman. So when the band began to play, everyone, whatever his nation, language, or religion, fell to the ground and worshiped the statue. But some officials went to the king and accused some of the Jews of refusing to worship. Your Majesty, they said to him, you made a law that everyone must fall down and worship the gold statue when the band begins to play, and that anyone who refuses will be thrown into a flaming furnace. But there are some Jews out there, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whom you have put in charge of the Babylonian affairs, who have defied you, refusing to serve your gods or to worship the gold statue you set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in a terrible rage, ordered Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be brought in before him. Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, he demanded, that you are refusing to serve my gods or to worship the gold statue I set up? I'll give you one more chance. When the music plays, if you fall down and worship the statue, all will be well. But if you refuse, you'll be thrown into a flaming furnace within the hour. And what God can deliver you out of my hands then? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not worried about what will happen to us. If we are thrown into the flaming furnace, our God is able to deliver us, and he will deliver us out of your hand, your majesty. But if he doesn't, please understand, sir, that even then we will never, under any circumstance, serve your God or worship the gold statue you have erected. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and his face became dark with anger at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He commanded that the furnace be heated up 7 times hotter than usual, and called for some of the strongest men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the fire. So they bound them tight with ropes and threw them into the furnace fully clothed. And because the king in his anger had demanded such a hot fire in the furnace, the flames leaped out and killed the soldiers as they were thrown in. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego fell down bound into the roaring flames. But suddenly, as he was watching, Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in amazement and exclaimed to his advisors, Didn't we throw 3 men into the furnace? Yes, they said, we indeed, your majesty. Well, look, Nebuchadnezzar shouted, I see 4 men unbound walking around in the fire. Glory. And they aren't even hurt by the flames. And the 4th looks like a god. My God, walking around in the fire. Thank you, Jesus. Walking around in the fire. Then Nebuchadnezzar, glory, came as close as he could to the open door of the flaming furnace and yelled, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. So they stepped out of the fire. Oh, now you want to call them there, old devil. Then the princes, governors, captains, and counselors crowded around them and saw that the fire hadn't touched them. Not a hair of their heads was singed, their coats were unscorched, and they didn't even smell the smoke. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Oh, you crazy man. For he sent his angel to deliver his trusting servants when they defied a king's commandment, who were willing to die rather than serve and worship any god except their own. Therefore, I make this decree that any person of any nation, language, or religion who speaks a word against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn from limb to limb and his house knocked into a heap of rubble. For no other God can do what this one does. Then the king gave promotions to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego so that they prospered great in the province of Babylon. Daniel chapter 4. This is the proclamation of Nebuchadnezzar the king, which he sent to people of every language and nation of the world. Greetings. I want you all to know about the strange thing that the Most High God did to me. It was terrible, a mighty miracle. And I know for sure his kingdom is everlasting and he reigns forever and ever. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was living in peace and prosperity when one night I had a dream that frightened me. I called in all the wise men of Babylon to tell me the meaning of the dream. But when they came, the magicians, astrologers, fortune tellers, and wizards, and I told them the dream, they couldn't interpret it. At last, Daniel came in, a man I named Belteshazzar after my God, the man in whom is the spirit of the holy gods, and I told him the dream. O Belteshazzar, master magician, I said, I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in you, and no mystery is too great for you to solve. Tell me what my dreams mean. I saw a very tall tree out in the field growing higher and higher into the sky until it could be seen by everyone in all the world. Its leaves were fresh and green, and its branches were weighted down with fruit enough for everyone to eat. Wild animals rested beneath its shade, and birds sheltered in its branches, and all the world was fed from it. Then as I lay there dreaming, I saw one of God's angels coming down from heaven. He shouted, cut down the tree, lop off its branches, shake off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Get the animals from out under it, the birds from its branches, but leave its stump and roots in the ground, banded with a chain of iron and brass, surrounded by the tender grass. Let the dew of heaven drench him and let him eat grass with wild animals. For 7 years, let him have the mind of an animal instead of a man. For this has been decreed by the watchers, demanded by the holy ones. The purpose of this decree is that all the world may understand that the Most High dominates the kingdoms of the world and gives them to anyone he wants to, even the lowliest of men. O Belteshazzar, that was my dream. Now tell me what it means. For no one else can help me. All the wisest men of the kingdom have failed me. But you can tell me, for the spirit of the holy gods is in you. Then Daniel sat there stunned and silent for an hour, aghast at the meaning of the dream. Finally, the king said to him, Belteshazzar, don't be afraid to tell me what it means. Daniel replied, oh, that the events foreshadowed in this dream would happen to your enemies, my lord, and not to you. For the tree you saw growing so tall, reaching into the heavens for all the world to see, with its fresh green leaves, loaded with fruit, for all to eat, the wild animals living in its shade, with its branches full of birds. That tree, your majesty, is you. For you've grown strong and great. Your greatness reaches up to heaven, and your rule to the ends of the earth. Then you saw God's angel coming down from heaven saying, cut down the tree and destroy it, but leave the stump and the roots in the earth, surrounded by tender grass, banded with a chain of iron and brass. Let him be wet with the dew of heaven for 7 years. Let him eat grass with the animals of the field. Your majesty, the Most High God, has decreed, and it will surely happen, that your people will chase you from your palace, and you will live in the fields like an animal, eating grass like a cow, your back wet with the dew from heaven. For 7 years this will be your life, until you learn that the Most High God dominates the kingdoms of men and gives power to anyone he chooses. But the stump and the roots were left in the ground. This means that you will get your kingdom back when you've learned that heaven rules. Oh, Nebuchadnezzar, listen to me. Stop sinning. Do what you know is right. Be merciful to the poor. Perhaps even yet God will spare you. But all these things happened to Nebuchadnezzar. 12 months after this dream, he was strolling on the roof of the royal palace in Babylon and saying, I, by my own might and power, have built this beautiful city as my royal residence and as the capital of my empire. While he was still speaking these words, a voice called from heaven, "O Nebuchadnezzar, this message is for you. You are no longer ruler of this kingdom. You will be forced out of the palace to live with the animals in the fields and to eat grass like the cows for 7 years, until you finally realize that God parcels out the kingdoms of men and gives them to anyone he chooses." That very same hour, this prophecy was fulfilled. Nebuchadnezzar was chased from his palace and ate grass like the cows, and his body was wet with dew. His hair grew as long as eagle feathers, and his nails were like bird claws. At the end of 7 years, I, Nebuchadnezzar, looked up to heaven, and my sanity returned. And I told y'all he was crazy. And I praised and worshiped the Most High God and honored him who lives forever, whose rule is everlasting, his kingdom forever. All the people of the earth are nothing when compared to him. He does whatever he thinks is best among the angels of heaven as well as here on earth. No one can stop him or challenge him, saying, "What do you mean by doing these things?" When my mind returned to me, so did my honor and glory and kingdom. My counselors and officers came to me, and I was reestablished as the head of my kingdom with even greater honor than before. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and glorify and honor the King of heaven. I bet you do. The judge of all, whose every act is right and good, for he's able to take those who walk proudly and push them into the dust. Daniel chapter 5. Belteshazzar, the king, invited 1,000 of his officers to a great feast where wine flowed freely. While Belshazzar, the king, invited 1,000 of his officers to a great feast where the wine flowed freely. While Belshazzar was drinking, he was reminded of the gold and silver cups taken long before from the temple in Jerusalem during Nebuchadnezzar's reign and brought to Babylon. Belshazzar ordered that these sacred cups be brought into the feast, and when they arrived, he and his princes, wives, and concubines drank toast from them to their idols made of gold, silver, brass, iron, wood, and stone. Suddenly, as they were drinking from these cups, they saw the fingers of a man's hand writing on the plaster of the wall opposite the lampstand. The king himself saw the fingers as they wrote. His face blanched with fear, and such terror gripped him that his knees knocked together and his legs gave way beneath him. "Bring the magicians and the astrologers," he screamed. "Bring the Chaldeans. Whoever reads that writing on the wall and tells me what it means will be dressed in purple robes of royal honor with a gold chain around his neck, and he will become third ruler in the kingdom." But when they came, none of them could understand the writing or tell what it meant. The king grew more and more hysterical. His face reflected the terror he felt, and his officers were shaken. But when the queen mother heard what was happening, she rushed to the banquet hall and said to Belshazzar, Calm yourself, your majesty. Don't be so pale and frightened over this. For there is a man in your kingdom who has within him the spirit of the holy gods. In the days of your father, this man was found to be full of wisdom, understanding, as though he himself were a god. And in the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar, he was made chief of all the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers of Babylon. Call for this man Daniel, or Belteshazzar, as the king called him, for his mind is filled with divine knowledge and understanding. He can interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve knotty problems. He will tell you what the writing means. So Daniel was rushed in to see the king. The king asked, "Are you Daniel, brought from Israel as a captive by King Nebuchadnezzar? I've heard that you have the spirit of gods within you and that you are filled with enlightenment and wisdom. My wise men and astrologers have tried to read the writing that is on the wall and tell me what it means, but they can't. I'm told you can solve all the mysteries. If you can tell the meaning of these words, I will clothe you in purple robes with a gold chain around your neck and make you third ruler in the kingdom." Daniel answered, "Keep your gifts and give them to someone else, but I will tell you what the meaning is. Your majesty, the Most High God, gave Nebuchadnezzar, who long ago preceded you, a kingdom and majesty and glory and honor. He gave him such majesty that all the nations of the world trembled before him in fear. He killed any who offended him and spared any he liked. At this whim they rose or fell. But when his heart and mind were hardened in pride, God removed him from his royal throne and took away his glory. He was chased out of the palace into the fields. His thoughts and feelings became those of an animal, and he lived among the wild donkeys. He ate grass like the cows, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, until at last he knew that the Most High overrules the kingdoms of men and appoints anyone he desires to rule over them. And you, his successor, O Belshazzar, you knew all this, yet you have not been humble. You have defiled the Lord of heaven and brought here the cups from the temple, and you and your officers and wives and concubines concubines have been drinking wine from them while praising gods of silver, gold, brass, iron, wood, and stone, gods that neither see nor hear anything or know anything at all. But you've not praised the God who gave you the breath of life and controls your destiny. And so God sent those fingers to write this message. Mene, mene, tekel, parsin. This is what it means. Mene means number. God has numbered the days of your reign and they are ended. Tekel means weighed. You've been weighed in God's balances and have failed the test. Parsin means divided. Your kingdom will be divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Then at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was robed in purple, a gold chain was hung around his neck, and he was proclaimed third ruler in the kingdom. But that very night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was killed, and Darius the Mede entered the city and began reigning at the age of 62. Daniel chapter 6. Darius divided the kingdom into 120 provinces, each under a governor. The governors were accountable to 3 presidents. Daniel was one of them, so the king could administer the kingdom efficiently. Daniel soon proved himself more capable than all the other presidents and governors, for he had great ability, and the king began to think of placing him over the entire empire as his administrative officer. This made the other presidents and governors very jealous, and they began searching for some fault in the way Daniel was handling his affairs so that they could complain to the king about it. But they couldn't find anything to criticize. He was faithful and honest, made no mistakes, so they concluded our only chance is his religion. They decided to go to the king and say, King Darius, live forever. We presidents, governors, counselors, and deputies have unanimously decided that you should make a law, irrevocable under any circumstance, that for the next 30 days, anyone who asks a favor of God or man except you, your majesty, shall be thrown to the lions. Your majesty, we request your signature on this law. Sign it so that it cannot be canceled or changed, and it will be a law of the Medes and Persians that cannot be revoked. So King Darius signed the law. But though Daniel knew about it, he went home and knelt down as usual in his upstairs bedroom with its windows open toward Jerusalem and prayed 3 times a day, just like he always did, giving thanks to his God. Then the men thronged to Daniel's house and found him there praying there, asking favors of his God. They rushed back to the king and reminded him about his law. Haven't you signed a decree, they demanded, that permits no petitions of any god or man except you for 30 days, and anyone disobeying will be thrown to the lions? Yes, the king replied, it is the law of the Medes and Persians that cannot be altered or revoked. Then they told the king, that fellow Daniel, one of the Jewish captives, is paying no attention to you or your law. He's asking favors of his God 3 times a day. Hearing this, the king was very angry with himself for signing the law and determined to save Daniel. He spent the rest of the day trying to think of some way to get Daniel out of this predicament. In the evening, the men came and said to the king, Your Majesty, there is nothing you can do. You signed the law and it cannot be changed. So at last the king gave order for Daniel's arrest, and he was taken to the den of lions. The king said to him, May your God whom you worship continually deliver you. And they threw him in. A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with that of his government, so that no one could rescue Daniel from the lions. Then the king returned to his palace and went to bed without dinner. He refused his usual entertainment and didn't sleep all night. Very early the next morning, he hurried out to the lion's den and called out in anguish, O Daniel, servant of the living God, was your God whom you worship continually able to deliver you from the lions? Then he heard a voice. Glory. Then he heard a voice. Your Majesty, live forever. It was Daniel. My God has sent his angel, and he said, to shut the lion's mouth so that they cannot touch me. For I'm innocent before God, nor, sir, have I wronged you. The king was beside himself with joy and ordered Daniel lifted from the den, and not a scratch was found on him, because he believed in his God. Thank you, Jesus. Glory to God. Then the king issued a command to bring the men who had accused Daniel and throw them into the den along with their children and their wives. Lord have mercy, the whole family. And the lions leaped upon them and tore them apart before they even hit the bottom of the den. Afterward, King Darius wrote this message addressed to everyone in his empire. Greetings, I decree that everyone shall tremble in fear before the God of Daniel in every part of my kingdom. For his God is the living, unchanging God, whose kingdom shall never be destroyed and whose power shall never end. He delivers his people, preserving them from harm. He does great miracles in heaven and earth. It is he who delivers Daniel from the power of the lions. So Daniel prospered in the reign of King Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. This is the word of the Lord. We're ending there, but we'll pick it back up tomorrow and finish up the book of Daniel. This is